welcome back to Hoffman Reproductions. Thank you for tuning in with us again here today. Coming to you indoors as the weather is very poor here, so we're switching subjects over from our gunpowder series to that of another. And the subject for today is from the early colonial period of American history. Now, most people have at least heard of the Jamestown settlement, the first permanent and successful English settlement in Virginia. And most people have heard of the French and Indian War, which took place in the 1750s. But that massive chunk of time in between those two, most people have very little knowledge of that. And there are a great many subjects and incidents and conflicts that we could talk about, but just to hone it down to one in particular, I'd like to talk with you today about the conflict which has become known as King Philip's War. So King Philip's War took place in the year 1675 to approximately 1676, and it was between the forces of the New England colonists, especially southern New England, against the native forces under command of Chief of the Wampanoags. The English gave this particular individual the name King Philip. What caused this conflict is what oftentimes caused conflicts in those days. You have two people groups who really did not care for one another, and the American Indian tribes felt they were being encroached upon by the English. Their land and their game were being driven and taken away, and so finally there were one too many straws, and the one that finally broke the camel's back resulted in armed conflict between Indian tribes in the southern and northern New England area. Now, one particular individual that I want to talk about here today that came to light during that time period was a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Church. Now, Mr. Benjamin Church was born in the year 1639 in Plymouth Colony. And by the time of this conflict, he would have been in his mid-20s, and he was awarded captain of a militia company in that area. Now, pretty quick on, Mr. Benjamin Church discovered that the European method of fighting was not going to work against these New England Indian tribes, and it was decided that a ranger type unit was to be established, and they were to adopt the tactics of the Indians, ambush, even their weaponry, more suited to the forest warfare, hit and run, ambush style tactics. And indeed, he is to be considered the father of modern day rangers. He was one of the first Europeans to adopt that style of fighting and was very successful in doing so. Now, later in his life, during the 1700s, Mr. Church wrote a diary that is largely considered one of the best resources as far as a look inside the type of fighting and the occurrences that happened during King Philip's War. Now, it's always a treat to get to work on weapons and items from that time period, and I've been fortunate enough to work on a few in my career, repairing several items that actually existed from that time period. And I have not had a chance to work on this item, but one such item that still exists is the sword that is supposed to be the one that Mr. Church, it's believed that he carried during this conflict, and it has been preserved today. It was kept by his family and eventually donated in the mid-1820s to the Massachusetts Historical Society, where the sword still remains. Now, not long ago, I was asked by a customer of ours if I could reproduce this sword, and thankfully there are a few photographs available online along with some measurements, and to the best of my ability I was able to do this. His musket was apparently also preserved. It was kept, but I'm not sure if it survived to this day or what happened to it. If anybody watching this knows where that musket is housed, I'd love to have information on it. So if you know anything about that, be sure to let me know. But I had the privilege of, again, to the best of my ability, to reproduce Mr. Church's sword that he carried during King Philip's War. So here we have Mr. Church's sword, better named a cutlass, as this particular sword has a reverse flare. In other words, it starts narrow, and as we get out here to the tip, it flares, making this a somewhat forward-heavy weapon. Most definitely designed for chopping and slashing, as it would have been used in close quarter fighting here in the colonies. This was not a finely made fencing type weapon. The blade itself has been hand forged out of 1075 tool steel and is just a shade under 39 inches long. The handle itself is 5 inches long and has been made of maple to match the original. The guard is made of iron to match the original with a plain iron pommel cap. And it's my opinion, after working on this particular piece, that I believe the blade was probably salvaged from one that came from Europe. A blade this long would have been difficult for an American blacksmith to reproduce, but then the handle and the guard and such, I believe, was blacksmith made, as it's fairly crude and utilitarian in nature. It's a no frills weapon designed for combat. It's light enough that you can wield this to attack or defend with relative ease, but it definitely has a forward weight to it. Again, meaning that this sword was designed for slashing and chopping, and it's kind of one of those things, the original, we wish it could talk, because I'm sure it can tell some cool tales. But I also reproduced the scabbard and the carriage for the sword. The original no longer exists, so I had to go with what I know of period pieces to reproduce those. But it was really a lot of fun and a privilege to be able to reproduce a period piece such as this. So, a couple of those up-close shots here before we go. And this sword is gently antiqued, as I'm fond of doing. Thank you for tuning in, and please be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We appreciate those of you that have, and we invite those of you that have not to do so. So thank you once again, and take care.